Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief. We're rounding up our roundups of 2022 today with a focus on South Asia, a region where a lot has been going on in the year that is now almost over. And also looking at the world of sport, where there were some major developments and some major personalities who have either left the living world or the playing world. First up, we're talking about South Asia with Prashant, who has been covering the region for People's Dispatch regularly. Prashant, what for you were the main talking points, the biggest stories from a region where a lot has been going on actually in 2022?
Right, Siddhant, I think many of the roundups we've been doing over the past few days, it's very difficult to encompass this world of developments within a few minutes. And South Asia, like you said, home to a vast majority of, a huge number of people, so many different cultures and diversities, but also bound by certain common threads. So like you said, a lot has been happening. We've seen mass protests take place, especially in Sri Lanka, which overthrew a government. We've seen the brunt of economic crisis which are taking place in countries like, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, which have really sort of pretty much affected in every sense of the term what is, has led to a huge deterioration in the standard of life, in the quality of life. It has forced governments and people to sort of, stare at the rock bottom, so to speak, and there's really no solution as of yet. We have seen a country like India, for instance, where, compared to some of the crises which have been taking place in neighboring countries, India's trajectory has been a bit more stable, so to speak. Nonetheless, huge challenges facing India, both in terms of the economy, as well as in terms of how institutions are faring in the face of a very prolonged right-wing assault that has been going on for many years, the right-wing being in power, of course. Yeah. And if you want to stretch things a bit, there's also Afghanistan. 2022, the first full year in which the Taliban was in power, and it seems to have sort of pretty much, confirmed what experts were fearing. As the months have passed, the policies have grown more and more regressive. The latest ones, of course, being the fact that they have banned the participation of women in NGOs, they have banned women from attending higher education. So a lot of very regressive policies, also indicating the fact that they are not the Taliban has not been able to establish relationships with other countries. The hopes that we had that maybe there could be some kind of process of negotiation and discussion whereby regional countries are able to sort of intervene with the Taliban and sort of establish some kind of a maybe slightly better space than what they were the last time they were in power. That seems to obviously have worked out. So, it's been very, and of course, there's Myanmar also, where there's been continuous violence from the military junta which took power in a coup, and ever since the violence has really intensified. So, all over, I would say that a very chaotic and difficult time period for a lot of countries in South Asia, in the subcontinent, so to speak, specifically in the Indian subcontinent. The Ukraine war definitely has played a huge factor. It has sort of accelerated some of the crises, I would say. But a lot of these crises are not they did not emerge in 2022. A lot of them have their roots in if you take every single country that I talked about, all the crises that we're talking about have their roots in previous years. 2022 may have been that year when many of these came to the fore, but there's been nothing really, nothing has been really surprising as far as many of these crises are concerned. But I would definitely say that, of all the countries, Sri Lanka, Pakistan specifically, probably the two to watch out the most in terms of how much things have changed in the course of this year.
Right. Then taking on from there, Prashant, we'll focus on Sri Lanka a bit more, where there was some kind of groundswell, ground-up movement that resulted in the change of government, but then very quickly reverted to the status quo. How are you viewing things in Sri Lanka currently, and what lies ahead for 2023?
Right. So, Siddhant, Sri Lanka is an interesting case, and I think we have mentioned this on the show before. It's a very small country, of course, but it seems sort of emblematic of the kind of crisis that were roiling many countries across the world, many countries in Africa, for instance, even countries in Latin America, where you had an economy which was extensively based on imports. The productive sector, because of decades of neoliberal policy, had completely declined, and the government had no option but continuously go to the IMF again and again over the years to sort of keep propping things up, and inflation was quite high. Fuel prices were, fuel was very difficult, and Sri Lanka was one country where these issues because I guess because of the also the size of the economy and how unstable it was, it suddenly came to the fore somewhere this year. And alongside that were also mass protests which sort of emerged, and there was a genuine moment of mass upsurge where it's not only the people who were the people who came out were a wide cross section. It was also the working class, the trade unions who played a very key moment, of course, but also the middle classes, who also felt affected enough because the supermarket shelves were empty. Because even their own supplies were being affected, right? And even the business sections, for that matter, all of whom sort of almost coalesced in this popular protest in various ways, and that led to those days, first in May and then July, when the government, this establishment of the Rajapaksas, which was really rooted in Sri Lanka, which was well entrenched, was completely shaken within a matter of months. Because just the previous year, it seemed like Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president, his brother was the prime minister, their family was all over the government, and they seemed unshakable. Nobody thought this would happen. But just within a few months, it completely turned, and the president was forced to leave. But then, like you said, what happened was, after that, the political establishment, including the Rajapaksas, brought Ranil Wickremesinghe to power, and he played a very clever game whereby he was able to sort of discuss with creditors, discuss with international agencies, bring some liquidity back, some supplies back, and that basically gave the middle classes and other sections some amount of breathing space, and then the incentive to actually not take part in fresh protests. On the other hand, simultaneously, there was also an increased amount of repression, a very sharp crackdown on anybody who raised their voices. So through a mix of repression and incentives, so to speak, given to the more well-off sections, they were able to sort of keep the protesters at bay, despite the fact that there has not been a huge gross change in the economy, so to speak. Now, Sri Lanka depending on an IMF loan, similarly Pakistan also depending on an IMF loan. In Pakistan, we saw that the Imran Khan government was deposed, but there was a huge round of flooding over there which caused a huge amount of problems. The current government has very little legitimacy, but in both these cases, like we talked about multiple times, there is no real solution in terms of how these governments can sort of try to address some of these crises. So I think these are very important examples, because I think many of these crises in various formats are being replayed in many other parts of the world. Like I said, you take a country like Tunisia, which is facing a similar crisis. Take a country like Zambia, which is facing a similar crisis. Argentina is facing its own crisis, although it has a progressive government. But so many countries across the world which have continuously fallen into the trap of the IMF, facing a very similar crisis. And in each country, the manifestation of people's anger, people's opposition takes place in different formats. In some way, in some places, there's a constructive effort to build a new project. In some places, there is just outright anger which pushes out. In some places, there is not even the space for that due to repression. So it's South Asia that way is, I think, a very interesting microcosm in terms of how you sort of see some of these developments in the world taking part. And I think although Sri Lanka and Pakistan are smaller countries, even for that matter Bangladesh, again facing a crisis, the government facing protests. A lot of when you say South Asia, you think of India a lot, and that's the one which often gathers a lot of news. But I think a lot of these smaller countries are also important because, like I said, there are a lot of parallels with what's happening across the world. So very important region to watch out in the coming year.
Sharda, welcome back to Daily Debrief. First of all, thank you for all the time that you have given to us and to our viewers this year. You've been a regular on the show talking about sports stories across disciplines, and some have been pure sporting stories, others have been more political in nature. But thank you very much for all of it, and it's only fitting that we're actually closing the year. The last show of the year is also with you. It's been a year, and as sports writers, we're a bit like more prone than others maybe to do these over dramatic headlines. But it was a year in which like the whole gamut of sort of human emotions was felt via some kind of sporting medium. And the big story of all of it came, of course, right at the end of the year. One of the legends of football, at least in the modern times, Pele, is not with us anymore. I'll hand it over to you and let you take it from there, actually.
Hi, Siddhant. It's been great to be on the Daily Debrief through this year, and to be looking at sports through a non-sort of Anglo-centric view, which is what we like to do. The passing of Pele was sort of almost inevitable. We knew it was coming because he'd been unwell and you kept hearing the news. But eventually, his leaving the sport, I think it just reminded everybody again in this whole sort of fairly trite kind of GOAT debate that happens at a World Cup and where it is, and you've got all these social media fans, and to remind all of us of the kind of skill that he brought to the game, and that Brazil brought to football. I mean, if you think of it, Pele and Muhammad Ali are the two biggest global superstars from sport that they ever were. This is pre the internet, pre television as well. So the power of their performance was so strong and it echoed so well. And let's say that the journalists did such a great job of telling us what they were all about, that you hear these stories, and therefore they are the frame against which everyone's greatness is measured. For Ali in a different way, and for Pele in a different way. And the most wonderful thing in a tribute, I don't think my generation remembers hearing stories of Pele and what a great player he was. For the newer generation, he's just some old guy, but he won 3 World Cups way back when the World Cup was not what it is today. Smaller teams, smaller competitions. But the most wonderful thing was that little video clip, which you've seen around the world, which said that whatever Messi does or Ronaldo does or whoever else does, Pele's already done it before. And then you can see all the moves, you can see all the feints, you can see the dribbles, you can see his use of space and his use of motion movement. And you literally see that through this grainy footage, and you then realize of what an extraordinary moment in time it must have been for him to be at the height of his power and to play. And I think the first time we understood what Brazil was in 82 when football first was shown live in India particularly, and the romance of Brazil. So everyone uses, I did a bit of reading as well, everyone uses 1950 as the point at which modern football began, and therefore the 58 win was important because football was the game of the global south, and he was called Ore, the king, and Brazil is still in all of our hearts. They're still the kings of football, the way they play, the way they approach the game, and so on. So honestly, just such an extraordinary athlete in so many ways.
It's interesting how I think his on-field persona, like you rightly mentioned, we didn't have access to it because it was before the television was what it is today, and therefore no YouTube videos also that you can really go back and see, and yet the legend has just grown and grown, and in a sense off the field it became more of a marketing exercise, and over time, Shada, do you think Pele himself sort of diluted his own brand in that sense by becoming so available and a mouthpiece for the sort of commercial side of the game that has just exploded since this advent of modern football?
What you're saying is a fair sort of assessment of the situation, because of that's who we began to see more and more and more of, in ads and in events and turning up at FIFA events and so on. And it's the time where the Brazilian Football Federation sold the shirt to Nike, right? That is seen as the big moment of sort of surrender almost. And so in an account of the Brazilian football, everyone said that, Pele was very respected. He is very respected in Brazil, but Garrincha was truly loved. But Garrincha's career ended in destitution and so on, and you would not want that of a great athlete. So in a good way, I think the passing of Pele has taken us back to his football, has taken us away from the marketing man and shown us what the athlete was. And maybe I think we need to be reminded of that, because I think at times also in our profession, we just get jaded and say, oh God, he's come again, he's telling the same story. But the player, we were able to see the player in whichever form. There's that movie called Birth of a Legend, which a lot of it is sort of highly dramatized, but some of it is true. His origins and where he came from, and the role of his father. Some of it is true. A lot of it is dramatized, but in a way, it sort of reminded you of what he was when he turned up as a 16-year-old, as a 17-year-old, and maybe in a way you should keep him fixed in your mind as the player on the field rather than the personality, because expecting sort of great principled stands from athletes outside of Ali, I think it's been virtually impossible across sport if you look at it now.
And Of course, there was also the small matter of a men's World Cup that concluded just recently. And when these things happen in December and then you're doing a year-ender after that, it's very hard to look beyond even the month that has gone by. But in that sense, Pele's legacy, as at least his legacy on the pitch as the footballer that he was, and Messi now winning a World Cup, and Pele at least hanging in there in hospice to watch Messi win that final. Is that sort of progression something that works for you in the larger sense of the football narrative?
I mean, in a romantic sense, it's a great sort of story, but I don't think Pele would want to put himself with Messi. You see, Pele thought himself as a far superior player to, yeah. Anyway, right, yeah. So there's Maradona maybe on the same day, and then there's these new guys with all their science and whatever. But I think still because of Messi's career of such longevity, and such a sustained excellence without, we can go into all his various other off-field kind of decisions and choices and so on, but that's different. But I think in a way of the small guy standing up against the sport of greater and greater explosive power, which you saw in Mbappe and how he played in that final and so on. To see him being able to still hold his own was wonderful. Maybe that's what the symmetry of it is too wonderful to have Pele Pele watch that Messi win that World Cup and say, all right, maybe we'll let you in finally. Otherwise, you'd have still been out of our little hall of footballing gods.
Yeah. Very, very small hall that is, but fast staking a claim for it are the English women's football team, who have actually swept the big sporting awards in that country, the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. So winning, Beth Mead won the Personality of the Year, the team won Team of the Year, and their coach, Serena Wigman, won Coach of the Year. Is this lip service, Sharda, or is women's football finally actually getting the kind of attention, space, platform and opportunity that is well deserved?
You would hope that it is sort of true. It's genuine sort of appreciation for what where women's football is at. It's really heartening to note that they were able that the women's football team was able to fight off the men's cricket team, which finally won England something. Won them a World T20 championships in fine style. Also in this year, but we are not referring to that sport. Don't worry about it, Siddharth. Considering that the women had also made the Women's World Cup final the last time it was played, they made the final. They had and the men had made the knockouts of the European sort of championship as well. It was only fair that football is a mass sport in Britain, and this was a great performance from a national English national team. So it was only fair, and it was only just that they should be rewarded in this way. And an interesting parallel I want to put in with India is that every time there's a World Cup, everyone says, when's India going to play the World Cup? And so I wrote a piece in which one of the football officials told me, she said, start with the women. The women will get there before the men. And once the women get there, you can bet that the men will follow. They will at least be able to qualify. So it's a good way to sort of frame conversations around football, particularly now that you're seeing what's happening in England and the fact that the women have been recognized in every. I mean, I cannot tell your viewers what a big deal it is for the cricketers to be overtaken by the women footballers. I culturally and all the rest of it, it's huge. So it was a huge, a great award, and full marks to BBC for that.
All right. Which takes us to the second bit of our show and away from the great sport of football for a little while, because in tennis, we've had two major icons calling it quits, Roger Federer and, of course, Serena Williams, arguably the greatest tennis player of all time. Where do you stand on the GOAT debate in this? At least here it's an individual sport, so it's a bit less, tried to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just you would have to say Serena, for all her achievements, she would have to be up there as the greatest tennis player of all times, and surely purely in terms of what she was able to do to the women's sport. She was able to change the language almost of the way that the sport is played, with her physicality and how she was able to she came into a sport which looked very different when she was a young woman, and now she's got girls who are hitting the ball as hard as she hit in her prime, harder if you look at it. And so to be that kind of an athlete, to be almost like a genre changer in herself is a massive achievement. But of course, Roger Federer got more ads and more public sort of sentiment that came out when he quit. Again, astonishing careers for both, but Roger Federer did give birth to babies. We must remind everybody. And in a way, you would hope that men's tennis particularly is able to produce a champion that can challenge this sort of a trifecta of Djokovic, Nadal, and now Federer is not playing anymore. But you hope that you're able to break that. It's gone on for almost 20 years, which for any sport is a little bit should be a little unnerving, that that your younger players are not able to break through. It doesn't matter how great your champions are, your younger players should be able to break through, especially in a game that is again about power and about there's an average height of the tennis player is now 6 feet 2 inches of the male tennis player, whatever, all of that, and you're still not able to break through. So hopefully this year will mark the time that you'll see the tide being the tide finally turning.
All right. We are almost out of time, Sharda. Very quickly, is there one particular sporting event or a couple maybe that you are looking forward to for 2023, other than, of course, spending time with us here on Daily Debrief?
I mean, there is one sport which I shouldn't talk to you about it. I would like to go and see the Champions Trophy final in the Champions League final. Sorry, the Champions League final in June. So I'm looking at that. I'll be following that closely. But there's a Cricket World Cup in India in October, November. So there's no escaping that.
Right. No escaping that for sure if you're in this part of the world. And we'll of course keep this. Keep this going through the new year as well, Sharda, with you talking about sport, about important stories that actually have global resonance in that sense. Thanks again today, as you have done, given us time throughout the year. Wish you all the best for the year that is to come. And also to our viewers, we'll call it a wrap for this episode, and also for our year roundups. In fact, this is the last of the lot. We'll see you in 2023 with more news, more conversations, more stories beyond the headlines of what's happening around the world, whether it's movements, politics, the economy, tech, all of that and a lot more. As always, of course, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all the work we do. And don't forget to follow us on the social media platform of your choice. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.